The conference room aboard the horizon's edge hummed with the soft noise of different species breathing in different ways. Hana sat near the viewport, her crystalline skin catching the light from the planet below and throwing rainbow patterns across the metal walls. Viridian 7 looked peaceful from orbit, covered in green forests that seemed to glow even from space. She had been staring at it for the past hour, waiting for the mission briefing to begin. Taman entered through the side door, his 6 limbs moving in perfect coordination, as he carried his data pad and a container of his preferred nutrient solution. He was always early, always prepared, always calculating something in his head. He nodded at Hana and settled into his specially designed chair, which accommodated his unusual body structure. Yuna arrived next, moving quietly as she always did. The Draxian medical officer had gentle eyes that seemed to see more than just the physical world. She smiled at both of them before taking her seat. Hana knew that Yuna could sense emotions, could feel the moods of everyone around her, and she wondered what Yuna felt from her right now. Probably boredom mixed with curiosity. The human came in last. Deho was relatively new to the crew, having joined them only 2 months ago. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair and a relaxed way of moving that seemed strange compared to the precise movements of the other species. He wore the standard expedition uniform, but somehow he made it look less formal, less rigid. He carried a worn bag over his shoulder that he never seemed to be without. Captain Velrix, a Thorian with silver scales and 3 eyes, activated the holographic display at the center of the table. The image of Viridian 7 expanded, showing detailed topographical maps of the northern forest sector. "We begin ground operations tomorrow," the captain announced in her clicking language, which the translation devices converted to each crew member's native understanding. "The survey will take 3 standard days. We need to establish a temporary base camp in this clearing here." She pointed to a spot on the map where the trees opened up near a stream. "I'll prepare the habitat modules," Taman said immediately, already making notes on his pad. "We'll need 3 units, standard configuration, with the atmospheric processors and perimeter sensors." "Actually," Deho said, leaning forward with an expression that Hana couldn't quite read, "I'd like to volunteer to handle the camping arrangements." There was silence. Hana looked at Taman. Taman looked at Yuna. Yuna looked at the captain. The captain's 3 eyes blinked in sequence, which usually meant she was confused. "Camping arrangements?" the captain repeated. "Yeah," Deho said, and he was smiling now, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm really good at camping. It's kind of a specialty of mine. I can set up everything we need for the base camp." Hana's crystalline skin flickered through several colors as she tried to process this. She had access to the ship's entire database through her neural link, and she quickly searched for the term. The results were frustratingly vague. Camping seemed to be some kind of human activity that involved being outdoors with minimal technology. The images showed humans sitting around fires and sleeping in fabric structures. It looked primitive and inefficient. "I don't understand," Taman said, which was rare for him. He understood most things very quickly. "Are you suggesting we forgo the standard habitat modules? Those units are designed for maximum safety and comfort. They have environmental controls, medical sensors, communication arrays, and defensive capabilities." "I know," Deho said calmly, "but camping is different. It's about working with the environment instead of separating yourself from it. Trust me, it'll be better than those sterile boxes." Hana found her voice. "What exactly is camping?" "The database is not clear about this human custom." Deho's smile grew wider. "That's because you can't really explain it. You have to experience it. But I promise you'll understand once we're there. And you'll enjoy it." Yuna tilted her head, her telepathic senses focused on the human. After a moment, she spoke softly. "He's telling the truth. He genuinely believes this will be a positive experience. His emotional state is enthusiastic and confident." The captain considered this. Her middle eye focused on Deho while the other 2 scanned the rest of the crew. "You would need to follow all safety protocols. Emergency beacons, medical supplies, communication devices." "Of course," Deho agreed. "I'm not talking about being reckless. Camping is about being prepared and using good judgment. I'll make sure everyone is safe and comfortable." "More comfortable than habitat modules?" Taman asked skeptically. His limbs twitched in a way that showed he was running calculations. "That seems improbable." "Different kind of comfortable," Deho said. "You'll see." The captain made a decision. "Very well. I approve this request. Deho will manage the base camp establishment. However, we will bring one habitat module as backup in case this camping proves inadequate. Fair enough, Deho said, and he looked genuinely happy about the arrangement. The briefing continued with discussions of the scientific objectives, the local wildlife that had been detected by orbital sensors, and the communication schedules. But Hana couldn't focus properly. She kept thinking about this mysterious camping thing. Why would anyone choose to live primitively when advanced technology was available? It didn't make logical sense. After the briefing ended, Hana caught up with Deho in the corridor. Can you at least tell me what supplies you'll need? I'm responsible for the equipment inventory. Sure, he said, pulling out his personal pad and transferring a list to her device. She looked at it and her skin flickered through confused colors again. Polymer rope, compressed fabric sheets, portable heating units that were designed for emergency use only, cutting tools, metal containers, water purification tablets, a small vibrosaw, and strangest of all, several packages of something called marshmallows, which the database identified as a human food item made primarily of sugar. This equipment seems very basic, she said carefully, trying not to sound insulting. Are you certain this will be sufficient? More than sufficient, he assured her. Humans have been camping for thousands of years. We know what we're doing. That evening, Hana visited the cargo bay where Deho was collecting his supplies. She watched as he carefully checked each item, his movements practiced and efficient. He packed everything into several bags with a precision that reminded her of Taemin's methodical nature, but with something else added to it. There was an element of anticipation, almost joy in the way he worked. You really love this camping thing, she observed. He looked up and grinned. I do. My family used to go camping every summer when I was young. My father taught me how to build shelters, start fires, read the weather, find clean water. Those are some of my best memories. But why? She asked, genuinely curious. Why would you choose to make life harder by not using available technology? Deho paused, considering his answer. It's not about making life harder. It's about remembering that we're part of nature, not separate from it. Technology is amazing, don't get me wrong, but there's something important about knowing you can survive and thrive with just your skills and the resources around you. It makes you feel connected to the world in a way that sitting in a climate-controlled box just doesn't. Hana thought about this. Her species had always embraced technology eagerly, always seeking more efficiency and comfort. The idea of intentionally using less seemed strange, but she could see in Deho's expression that this was deeply meaningful to him. I hope you'll show us, she said finally. I hope we'll understand. You will, he promised. Camping has a way of speaking for itself. Taemin arrived then, still skeptical but curious enough to want to see what the human was planning. Even Yuna stopped by, drawn by the emotional resonance she felt from Deho's excitement. They all watched as he finished his preparations, none of them truly understanding what they were about to experience. Tomorrow, they would descend to Viridian 7's surface. Tomorrow they would learn what camping really meant. And tomorrow the human would show them something that none of their advanced educations had prepared them for. The shuttle descended through Viridian 7's atmosphere with barely a shudder, the advanced stabilizers compensating for the air currents automatically. Hana piloted them down toward the clearing that had been selected from orbit, her crystalline fingers dancing across the holographic controls with practiced ease. Through the viewport, the forest stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of green and blue and purple vegetation that seemed to pulse with life. Atmospheric composition is within acceptable ranges for all species aboard, Taemin announced from his sensor station. Temperature is comfortable. Local wildlife detected, but nothing showing aggressive patterns. Landing zone is clear. The shuttle touched down softly in the center of the clearing. The cargo ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, and the crew got their first real look at the world they would call home for the next 3 days. The clearing was perhaps 50 meters across, surrounded by massive trees that had to be at least 100 meters tall. Their leaves gave off a soft bioluminescent glow even in the daylight, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. A stream bubbled somewhere nearby, the sound of running water clear in the clean air. Yuna was the first to step onto the soil, and she immediately knelt down, placing her hand on the ground. So much life, she whispered, her telepathic senses clearly overwhelmed by the biological richness of the forest. I can feel it everywhere. Taemin began unloading equipment with mechanical efficiency. He had the habitat module deployment sequence memorized and moved with purpose. directing the anti-grav sleds that carried the compressed habitat units. Within minutes, he had marked out the positions where each module would be installed, creating a perfect grid pattern that maximized space usage and ensured optimal sensor coverage. Hana helped with the unloading, while Captain Velrix monitored everything from the shuttle's command center, ready to coordinate if any problems arose. The work was familiar and routine. They had done this dozens of times on other worlds. Deho emerged from the shuttle carrying his bags of camping equipment. He stood at the edge of the clearing for a long moment, just looking around. His eyes moved from the trees to the ground to the sky, and he seemed to be calculating something, though Hana couldn't imagine what. Finally, he turned to the captain. "I'm going to set up camp about 100 meters into the forest that direction," he said, pointing toward the stream sound. "There's a good spot there, I can tell. I should be done in a few hours. Do you need assistance?" Taman asked, pausing in his habitat module assembly. "No thanks," Deho said with that easy smile of his. "Camping is something you have to experience, not observe. Besides, I work better alone on this part. You'll see the result when I'm done." Hana watched him disappear into the tree line, carrying his bags and the vibro saw. Part of her wanted to follow, to understand what he was doing, but she respected his request for space. Instead, she returned to helping Taman with the habitat modules. The work went smoothly. The modules deployed exactly as designed, expanding from their compressed forms into full-sized structures in a matter of minutes. Taman connected the power cells, activated the atmospheric processors, and established the sensor perimeter. Everything was color-coded and labeled. Everything had its place. Within 2 hours, they had a functioning base camp that met every regulation and safety standard, but it felt empty somehow. Sterile. The modules were practical and comfortable, with temperature control and air filtration and soft lighting, but they could have been anywhere. There was nothing about them that acknowledged or embraced the beautiful forest that surrounded them. They were bubbles of artificial environment imposed on a natural world. Hana found herself wandering toward the edge of the clearing, looking in the direction Deho had gone. She could hear sounds occasionally, the buzz of the vibro saw, the crack of wood, the splash of water. Once she thought she heard him singing something in his native language, though she couldn't make out the words. Yuna joined her. "He's happy," the Draxian said. "I can feel his emotions from here. He's completely absorbed in what he's doing. It's almost like meditation for him. What could possibly take so long?" Hana wondered. "With our equipment, building a shelter takes minutes." "Perhaps that's not the point," Yuna suggested gently. Taman was not content to simply wait. He calculated that they still had 4 hours of good daylight remaining, and he wanted to begin the scientific surveys. But Captain Velrix instructed them to wait until Deho returned, as they should stay together until they were familiar with the local environment. So they waited, and as they waited, the forest around them came alive. Small creatures emerged from the underbrush, curious about the new visitors. Flying things that weren't quite birds or insects circled overhead. The bioluminescent leaves began to glow brighter as the afternoon progressed toward evening. The stream burbled its constant song. The air smelled of growing things and clean water and something sweetly floral. It was beautiful, and yet the crew remained in their habitat modules, separated from it all by walls and filters and force fields, safe, comfortable, and somehow missing something. As the sun began its descent and the shadows grew longer, Deho finally emerged from the forest. He was dirty, sweaty, and grinning from ear to ear. There were leaves in his hair and what looked like moss stains on his uniform. He looked more alive than Hana had ever seen him. "Okay," he announced. "Camp is ready. Follow me." He led them into the forest along a path he had marked with small painted stones. The path wound between the massive trees, following the natural contours of the land. Hana noticed that Deho had been careful not to damage the vegetation unnecessarily. Where he had needed to clear some undergrowth, he had done so selectively, leaving the forest feeling natural rather than carved through. The sound of the stream grew louder. The bioluminescence was stronger here, away from the clearing. The light filtering through the canopy created patterns that shifted with every breeze. It felt like walking into another world, or perhaps into the world they had been avoiding by staying in their modules. They rounded a curve between two enormous trees, and Hana stopped so suddenly that Taman nearly walked into her. Before them stood something she had no words for. It was a structure, yes, but unlike any structure she had seen. It blended into the forest as if it had grown there naturally, and yet it was clearly built with purpose and skill. The main shelter was constructed from fallen logs and branches that Daeho must have gathered, reinforced with some of his polymer supports where needed. The wood was different colors and textures, creating a pattern that was both random and harmonious. He had covered the roof with the compressed fabric from his supplies, but he had treated it somehow so that it mimicked the colors of the surrounding forest. Bioluminescent moss decorated the edges, providing natural light. But the shelter itself was only part of what he had created. In the center of a carefully cleared area was a circle of stones clearly meant for fire. Logs had been positioned around it as seats, each one at a comfortable height and distance. Nearby, a system of ropes and pulleys had been rigged between trees, with containers suspended high above the ground. Water flowed through a channel he had dug from the stream, passing through layers of sand and gravel in what was obviously a filtration system. The interior of the shelter had been divided into separate spaces, one for each crew member. Hana could see that Daeho had used fabric partitions to create privacy. Each space had a platform raised off the ground and covered with compressed foam padding. He had even placed small containers in each area, perfect a ladder leading up to a platform maybe 10 meters above the ground. From there, Hana could see glimpses of the forest canopy and the clearing beyond. Around the entire camp, Daeho had placed markers, subtle but clear, that would warn them of the camp's boundaries. He had even created a small washing station near the stream, with clean water flowing through and drainage leading safely away. It was primitive by their standards. It used no advanced technology. It had no force fields, no atmospheric processors, no medical sensors. And yet, standing there looking at it, Hana felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt like she had come home. Taemin's 6 limbs were all twitching, which meant he was calculating rapidly. The structural integrity, he muttered, moving closer to examine the joints and supports. The weight distribution. The water flow. It's all sound. This shouldn't work with such basic materials, but it does. Yuna had tears running down her face, which alarmed Hana until she realized they were happy tears. The spaces, the Draxian said softly. You made spaces for each of us. You thought about what we would need. Daeho shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. Well, yeah. That's part of camping. Taking care of your camping buddies. How long did this take you? Hana asked, still trying to process what she was seeing. About 4 hours, he said. Could have been faster, but I wanted to do it right. Good camping is about attention to detail. The captain had followed them and was now all 3 eyes. Finally, she spoke. This is remarkable. You built this entire complex in the time it took us to deploy 3 habitat modules. It's not a competition. Daeho said gently. The modules are great for what they do. But this is different. This is about being... Daeho knelt beside the stone circle and began arranging pieces of wood in a very specific pattern. He placed larger pieces on the bottom, creating a stable base, then added increasingly smaller pieces on top in a structure that reminded Taemin of architectural principles he had studied. There was a clear logic to it, even though it was being done entirely by hand with natural materials. Fire is fundamental to camping, Daeho explained as he worked. It provides warmth, light, a way to cook food, and a gathering place. Humans have been sitting around fires together for hundreds of thousands of years. It's in our blood. Hana watched carefully as he took out a small ignition device from his pack. She had expected something primitive, maybe rubbing sticks together like she had seen in one historical database entry about ancient humans. Instead, he used a simple modern fire starter. When she looked confused, he smiled. Camping doesn't mean being stupid about it, he said. We use the right tools for the job. The point isn't to suffer, it's to live well with less. He ignited the smallest pieces of wood first, the kindling catching easily. The flames grew, spreading to larger pieces until a proper fire crackled in the stone circle. The smoke rose straight up, drawn by the natural airflow between the trees. Hana realized he had chosen this spot partly because of how the wind moved through the forest. As darkness settled over Viridian 7, the forest transformed completely. The bioluminescent plants glowed brighter, creating a shifting pattern of blues and greens and purples all around them. The stream reflected the light, making it look like liquid stars. The sounds changed too, with night creatures beginning their songs and calls. It should have felt dangerous or uncomfortable, but somehow it didn't. The firelight pushed back against the darkness, creating a bubble of warmth and safety. Deho had positioned the logs around the fire pit at exactly the right distance, close enough to feel the heat but far enough to be comfortable. The crew settled onto the logs, and for the first time since landing, they all just sat together without working on something. "This is strange," Taman said, watching the flames dance. "We're sitting in the dark on pieces of wood, surrounded by unknown wilderness with only a chemical reaction for protection. And yet I feel comfortable." "That's camping," Deho said. He had produced a metal container and was preparing some kind of food over the fire. The smell was incredible, something Hana's translator couldn't identify but her senses found deeply appealing. Yuna was gazing into the flames, her telepathic senses open. The fire is alive in its own way. Not conscious, but changing, moving, responding to the wood and air. It's hypnotic. "Humans have been staring into fires for our entire history," Deho said. "Some scientists think it's actually good for our brains, that the random patterns of flames help us relax and think more clearly. I don't know if that's true, but I know it feels right." Captain Velrix had initially planned to return to the shuttle for the night, but even she seemed drawn to stay. She sat on her log, all three eyes reflecting the firelight, and for once she wasn't giving orders or checking protocols. She was just present. The food Deho prepared was simple but delicious. He had combined standard rations with some of his special camping supplies, creating meals that tasted different from anything they normally ate aboard ship. He explained that camping food was meant to be comforting and warming, not just nutritionally efficient. "What are those white things?" Taman asked, pointing to the package of marshmallows. "Oh, those are for later," Deho said with a mysterious smile. "There's a camping tradition I want to show you." As they ate, Deho began telling stories. He talked about camping trips with his family when he was young, about learning to read the stars from his grandfather, about getting lost once and finding his way back by following a stream downhill. He talked about the time he and his brother built a shelter that immediately collapsed when it rained, and what they learned from that failure. The stories weren't dramatic or heroic. They were small, personal human stories, but somehow they were fascinating. Hana found herself leaning forward, wanting to hear more. Even Taman stopped calculating long enough to simply listen. "Why did your people keep doing this?" Hana asked. "Camping, I mean. Once you had technology to make life easier, why keep returning to primitive methods?" Deho thought about this while he poked at the fire, adjusting a log. "I think because we needed to remember who we are. Technology is amazing. It lets us travel between stars, cure diseases, live in comfort, but it can also separate us from the basics of existence. Camping reminds us that we're animals who evolved in nature. We need to touch the earth, breathe unfiltered air, test ourselves against real challenges, not to survive but to feel alive." "But you're using some technology," Taman pointed out. "The fabric for the roof, the fire starter, the water purification tablets." "Of course," Deho agreed. "Like I said, camping isn't about being stupid. It's about balance. Use technology where it makes sense, but don't let it do everything for you. The shelter is mostly natural materials, but I reinforced key points with modern materials because that's smart. I used natural water filtration through sand and gravel, but I added purification tablets as backup because that's safe. The point is to engage with the environment, not to reject all tools." Yuna spoke softly. "In your habitat modules, I can feel your minds. You're always thinking about work, about efficiency, about the next task. But here, sitting around this fire, your thoughts are different, slower, deeper, more connected to each other." She was right. Hana realized she wasn't thinking about tomorrow's work schedule or the equipment inventory. She was just sitting, feeling the warmth of the fire, listening to the forest sounds, enjoying the company of her crew members. When had she last done that? Deho pulled out the marshmallows and showed them how to roast them on sticks over the fire. It was a silly activity, holding a piece of sugar foam over flames until it turned golden brown. But it was also fun in a way that Hana hadn't experienced in a long time. Taman's first marshmallow caught fire, and instead of being upset, he laughed. Hana couldn't remember the last time she had heard him laugh. The captain tried one and declared it interesting, which was high praise from a Thorian. As the night deepened, the conversation drifted to more personal topics. Yuna talked about her homeworld and how she missed the gardens there. Taman discussed his family's engineering dynasty and the pressure he felt to always be perfect. Hana admitted that sometimes she felt lonely, despite being surrounded by crew members all the time. Even the captain shared stories about her own youth, things she had never mentioned before. The fire created a space where it felt safe to be vulnerable. The darkness around them was held back but not eliminated, and in that balance between light and shadow, truth felt easier to speak. "This is what camping really is," Deho said quietly. "It's not about the shelter or the fire or the techniques. Those are just tools. Camping is about creating space for connection. When you strip away the distractions and the artificial environments, when you sit together in a simple place doing simple things, you remember how to actually be with each other." "Your species understood something important," Captain Velric said, and there was respect in her clicking voice. "We have built great civilizations, advanced technologies, powerful ships, but we have forgotten how to sit together around a fire." Hana looked around the camp with new understanding. The shelter wasn't just a primitive building. It was a statement. It said that they belonged here in this forest on this planet, not as conquerors or observers behind force fields, but as participants in the natural world. The camp worked with the environment rather than fighting against it. The suspended food containers weren't just storage. They were acknowledgement that this forest had other inhabitants, and that the crew needed to coexist with them responsibly. The water filtration system used the stream without damming or destroying it. The bioluminescent moss provided light without requiring power cells. Everything had been designed to minimize impact while maximizing comfort. It was, Hana realized, a kind of engineering that her advanced civilization had forgotten. Not engineering to dominate, but engineering to harmonize. "I thought camping was about survival skills," Taman said. "But it's not, is it? It's about living skills." "Exactly," Deho said, and he looked pleased that Taman understood. "Anyone can survive if they have enough technology. Camping teaches you how to live with intention, with awareness, with respect for your environment and your companions." A nightbird called from somewhere in the canopy above them, a sound that was alien and beautiful. The fire crackled. The stream sang its endless song. The forest breathed around them, alive and accepting. Hana felt her crystalline skin shift to colors she rarely displayed, colors that indicated contentment and peace. She was sitting on a log in a primitive camp on an alien world, and she felt more at home than she had in years aboard her advanced starship. "Thank you," she said to Deho, "for showing us this." "Thank you for being willing to learn," he replied. "A lot of people think humans are just good at fighting or building or exploring. But maybe our real gift is remembering that simple things matter. Good food, warm fire, friends talking in the darkness. That's what we've carried across the stars." They sat together long into the night, watching the fire burn down to coals, listening to the forest, sharing silence that was more comfortable than any words. And when they finally retreated to their sleeping spaces in the shelter, Hana lay on her platform and realized she could hear the stream and the night sounds and feel the slight breeze through the fabric walls. She could have been in a sealed habitat module, completely isolated from the environment. Instead, she was here, connected to this world, protected but present. She understood now what camping meant, and she understood why humans had never let it go, even when they reached for the stars. Hana woke to the sound of birds that weren't quite birds calling to each other in the canopy above. For a moment she was disoriented, expecting to see the metal ceiling of her quarters aboard the ship. Instead, she saw fabric that moved slightly with the breeze, letting in filtered morning light and the sweet smell of the forest. She had slept better than she had in months. The camp was already stirring. She could hear Deho moving around outside, and when she emerged from her sleeping space, she found him tending a small fire and preparing some kind of morning meal. The smoke rose in a thin line, almost invisible against the morning sky. "Coffee?" he offered, holding up a metal cup. She had tried coffee once before and found it bitter, but this morning in this place it seemed appropriate. The bitterness was balanced by something sweet he had added, and the warmth was comforting. Taman emerged next, looking surprisingly alert. "I analyzed the structural efficiency of this camp during the night," he announced. "The materials to protection ratio is actually quite remarkable. You've achieved functional shelter with minimal resource expenditure." "That's the idea," Deho said, smiling. "Work smart, not hard." Yuna was the last to wake, and she looked peaceful in a way Hana had never seen before. "I dreamed," she said softly. "Real dreams, not just processing thoughts. I think being here, connected to all this life, it helps my mind rest properly." They ate breakfast together around the fire pit, even though the morning was warm enough that they didn't need the heat. The fire had become a gathering place, a center point for their small community. Captain Velrix had returned to the shuttle the previous night, but now arrived at the camp, looking curious about this camping experience her crew was having. The plan for the day was to conduct scientific surveys of the forest ecosystem. They would document plant life, track animal movements, take soil samples, and map the area in detail. It was exactly the kind of work they had done on dozens of worlds before, but somehow it felt different this morning. Instead of treating the forest as something to catalog from behind sensor screens, they were walking through it, touching it, smelling it. Deho showed them how to move quietly through the underbrush, how to read signs of animal passage, how to identify plants that were safe to touch and ones that should be avoided. Taman discovered that 6 limbs made him excellent at climbing trees to reach samples. Una found that her telepathic senses could actually detect the presence of animals before visual sensors picked them up. Hana's crystalline biology resonated with certain types of bioluminescent plants in ways she had never explored before. They worked through the morning and into early afternoon, gathering data but also simply experiencing the forest. It was science, but it was also connection. They were learning about this world not just by measuring it, but by being part of it. Around mid-afternoon, Deho paused and looked up at the sky. The others followed his gaze, but saw only the canopy and patches of clouds beyond. "Weather's changing," he said quietly. The forecast showed clear conditions for the next 2 days. Taman said, checking his scanner. "Maybe," Deho said. "But I don't like the feel of the air. Pressure's dropping."
"See how the leaves are turning?"
"And listen, the animals have gone quiet." Hana listened and realized he was right. The forest sounds that had been constant all morning had faded. An eerie silence had settled over everything. Back at the camp, Deho checked his emergency communicator and frowned. "Captain, are you seeing anything on the orbital sensors?" Captain Velrix's voice came through clearly. "Checking now. Wait. Yes, there's a weather system developing much faster than predicted. It wasn't there an hour ago, but it's building rapidly. Storm front approaching from the west. Estimated arrival in 30 minutes. How bad?" Deho asked. "Significant electrical activity. High winds. Heavy precipitation. You should return to the shuttle immediately or seal yourselves in the habitat modules." Hana's stomach tightened. The habitat modules were back at the landing clearing, at least 200 meters away. They could make it, but it would be close. She looked around at the camp they were in, the beautiful shelter Deho had built, and felt suddenly vulnerable. Wood and fabric against a major storm. "We won't make it to the modules in time," Taman calculated. "Even at maximum safe speed through this terrain, the storm will hit before we arrive. Then we go to the shuttle," Hana said, but Deho was shaking his head. "The shuttle's even farther, and we'd be completely exposed crossing the clearing." "We're safer here." "Here?" Taman's limbs twitched rapidly. "This structure cannot possibly withstand high winds. The habitat modules are reinforced composite materials with active stabilization. This is wood and fabric. This is a shelter built specifically for storms," Deho corrected calmly. "I didn't just build it anywhere. I chose this location because these big trees create a windbreak. The shelter is positioned to deflect wind, not resist it. And I built it low and strong, not tall and rigid." "You anticipated this?" Una asked. "I always anticipate storms," he said. "That's camping rule 1. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst." The first wind gusts hit, making the leaves rustle violently. The sky visible through the canopy had darkened to an ominous gray. Hana could see Taman running calculations in his head, probably determining their exact chances of survival in various scenarios. She didn't ask for the results. "Everyone listen up," Deho said, his voice calm but commanding. "We need to prepare the camp. Taman, help me secure the food containers and tie down anything loose. Hana, check the water channel and make sure it won't flood the shelter. Una, gather all our equipment packs and move them to the center of the shelter where it's most protected. Captain, we'll update you as conditions allow, but we might lose communication during the storm." "Understood," the captain said, and Hana could hear the worry in her clicking voice. "Be safe." They moved quickly, following Deho's instructions. Hana found that the water channel he had built actually had a secondary path that would divert overflow away from the shelter if the stream rose. Everything he had done had layers of thought behind it. The morning after the storm was different. The forest sparkled with water droplets that caught the light like crystals. The air smelled clean and fresh, washed pure by the rain. The bioluminescent plants seemed to glow more brightly, as if the storm had energized them somehow. Everything felt renewed. Hana sat on her log by the fire pit watching Daeho prepare breakfast. He moved with the same calm confidence as always, but now she understood what that confidence meant. It wasn't arrogance or recklessness. It was knowledge earned through generations of human experience, passed down and tested and proven. Taemin had barely slept. He had spent most of the night examining every aspect of the shelter's construction, measuring angles, testing joints, trying to understand exactly why it had worked so well. Now he sat with multiple data pads spread around him, covered in calculations and diagrams. "I need to completely revise my understanding of structural engineering," he announced to no one in particular. "I've been trained to maximize rigidity and resistance, but you built for flexibility and redirection. The mathematics are actually more complex, not simpler. You have to understand the environment and work with it, not just impose your design on it." "That's what humans learned the hard way," Daeho said, handing him a cup of the bitter morning drink. "For thousands of years we built things that fell down, got blown away or collapsed. We learned from every failure. When you live on one planet for your entire evolutionary history, you learn that planet's rules very well." Yuna emerged from the shelter looking more rested than she had since they landed. "I felt the forest last night," she said. "During the storm." It wasn't angry or violent. It was just being itself. The storm was natural, part of the cycle. And we survived it by being part of that cycle too, not fighting against it. "Exactly," Daeho said. "That's the core of camping philosophy. You're not trying to conquer nature. You're trying to live with it as part of it." Captain Velrix arrived from the shuttle, picking her way carefully through the storm debris. She inspected the camp thoroughly with all three eyes before speaking. "I have filed a report with the fleet. The habitat modules failed to meet their design specifications. This camp exceeded all expectations. Command wants to know more about these human camping techniques." "It's not really a technique," Daeho said. "It's more of a mindset. You look at what the environment offers, what challenges it presents, and you find ways to work with both." Over the next 2 days, as they completed their scientific survey, the crew began to truly embrace camping. Taemin started applying camping principles to his engineering work, thinking about flexibility and environmental integration instead of just strength and efficiency. He designed a new type of shelter system that combined the best of both approaches. Advanced materials used in ways that worked with natural forces instead of against them. Hana discovered that her crystalline biology could interface with certain plants in the forest, sharing information at a chemical level. It was something her species had never explored because they were always so focused on technological interfaces. But here, camping in nature, she found a whole new way of understanding the universe. Yuna spent hours simply sitting in the forest, letting her telepathic senses open to the ecosystem around her. She realized that her medical training had focused entirely on treating individuals. But camping taught her about health as a relationship between beings and their environment. She started developing new treatment approaches based on this understanding. Word spread through the fleet about what had happened on Viridian 7. Other ships requested information. Other crews wanted to learn. Daeho found himself being contacted by species from across the galaxy, all curious about this human tradition of camping. Some were skeptical at first. A group of Veltharians argued that they had evolved beyond the need for such primitive activities. But when Hana showed them the recordings of the storm and explained how the camping shelter had outperformed their habitat modules, they became interested. When Taemin shared his new engineering insights, they became fascinated. The Korvathi Engineering Council invited Daeho to give a presentation on camping architecture. He spent 3 hours teaching multi-limbed engineers about human shelter building, and they filled dozens of data pads with notes. They started incorporating camping principles into their designs for planetary installations and emergency shelters. The Draxian Medical Institute wanted to understand the psychological benefits of camping. Yuna collaborated with them, explaining how the simple act of sitting around a fire or sleeping connected to nature had profound effects on mental health. They began developing therapy programs that incorporated camping experiences. But the most meaningful changes happened within the crew of the Horizon's Edge. They had become something more than colleagues. They had become friends, bonded by shared experience and genuine connection. The barriers between species seemed less important after sitting together around a fire, surviving a storm together, learning from each other's strengths. On their last evening on Viridian 7, the crew gathered at the camp one final time. They had decided to leave the structure standing as a monument, a teaching tool for other crews who might visit this world. Deho had marked it with a small plaque that explained what camping meant and why it mattered. They sat around the fire pit as the sun set, and the bioluminescence began to glow. Deho had saved his last surprise, something he had been planning since the beginning. He pulled out ingredients and cooking equipment and began preparing a feast. Not the simple meals they had been eating, but something special. Camping isn't just about survival, he explained as he cooked. It's also about celebration. When humans camp, we mark special moments, last nights together, achievements, friendships formed, and we do it with food, fire, and fellowship. The meal he created was incredible. He combined ingredients from each of their homeworlds with earth spices and cooking techniques. It was a symbol of what camping had taught them, that different elements could work together to create something better than any single part alone. As they ate, they talked about what they had learned. Taman admitted that he had thought humans were primitive at first, relying on old methods instead of embracing progress. But I understand now, he said. You never abandoned your old knowledge. You built on it. You carry thousands of years of survival wisdom alongside your advanced technology. That makes you stronger, not weaker. Hana spoke about connection. My species is so focused on efficiency and logic that we forgot how to simply be with each other. Camping forced us to slow down, to pay attention, to actually exist in the moment. I think we've lost something important in our pursuit of advancement. Yuna smiled through happy tears. You gave us a gift, she said to Deho. You could have just let us use our habitat modules. It would have been easier. But you shared something precious from your culture, and it changed us. Captain Velric stood up, which was unusual for her during casual moments. I have been a ship captain for 40 years, she said. I have visited hundreds of worlds and worked with dozens of species. I thought I understood what made good crews work well together. But I was wrong. Good crews are efficient. Great crews are connected. Camping taught us the difference. Deho looked around at all of them, and his expression was humble. This is what humanity brings to the galaxy, he said quietly. Not the biggest weapons or the fastest ships or the most advanced technology. We bring the knowledge that simple things matter. That sitting around a fire together builds stronger bonds than any alliance treaty. That surviving a storm in a shelter you built with your own hands teaches you more than any simulation. That being part of nature instead of separate from it makes you wiser. They sat together long into the night, watching the fire burn down to coals for the last time. In the morning, they would pack their equipment and return to orbit. They would continue their mission, visiting other worlds, conducting other surveys. But they would be different people now. Taman had already requested permission to refit the ship's emergency shelters using camping principles. Hana was writing a paper about integrating biological interfaces with natural environments. Yuna was developing a mental health program called Fire Circle Therapy. Even Captain Velric had ordered modifications to the ship's recreation areas, adding spaces designed for simple gathering rather than just entertainment or exercise. As the fire died and the forest settled into its nighttime rhythms, Hana asked the question she had been thinking about all week. Will you teach others? Will you help the galaxy learn what camping means? Deho smiled. I will. But camping isn't really something you teach. It's something you share, and now all of you can share it too. You understand it? You've lived it. You can show others what it means to work with nature instead of against it, to value wisdom alongside technology, to build connection through simple shared experiences. The next morning, they performed one final task before leaving. Together, they gathered stones from the stream and built a new fire pit near the landing clearing. Beside the damaged habitat modules, it was a symbol of what they had learned, that both approaches had value. Technology and wisdom, progress and tradition, efficiency and connection. They marked it with words in every language of the crew. Camping taught us strength comes not from resistance but from flexibility. Comfort comes not from isolation but from connection. Survival comes not from conquering nature, but from understanding it. These lessons humanity learned over thousands of years. Now they belong to all of us. As the horizon's edge lifted off from Viridian 7 and climbed back toward orbit, Hana looked down at the forest one last time. She could just barely see the camp they had built, a small clearing in the vast wilderness. It looked insignificant from space, just a tiny mark on a huge planet. But she knew better now. That small camp represented something enormous. It represented wisdom earned through countless generations of human experience. It represented the understanding that advancement didn't mean abandoning the past but building on it. It represented the truth that sometimes the most sophisticated solution was also the simplest. Other ships in the fleet were already requesting camping training. Other crews wanted to learn. The idea was spreading, not because it was forced or mandated, but because it worked, because it was true, because it filled a need that advanced species didn't even know they had. In the observation lounge that evening, the crew gathered as they often did. But now they sat in a circle, with simple lighting designed to mimic firelight. They had created their own camping space aboard the ship. It wasn't the same as being in a forest, but it captured the spirit, simple, connected, present. No one knew what camping meant, Taman said, looking around at his friends, until the human built a stronghold in the woods. And now we all know, not just the definition, but the meaning. Deho raised his cup in a toast, to camping, to wisdom, to connection, to understanding that sometimes the strongest shelter is built not from the toughest materials, but from the deepest knowledge. They raised their cups together. Through the viewport, stars blazed in the darkness of space. The horizon's edge carried them forward into the unknown, a tiny ship in the immensity of the galaxy. But aboard that ship, something new traveled with them, a simple idea with profound implications, a human tradition that had become a galactic lesson, a reminder that no matter how far any species traveled or how advanced they became, the fundamental truths remained the same. Connection matters. Wisdom matters. Understanding your environment matters. Working with nature instead of against it matters. Sitting together in simple spaces, sharing food and stories and firelight matters. Camping matters. And now, thanks to one human and his willingness to share, the galaxy was beginning to understand why. Taman worked with surprising efficiency, his multiple limbs making quick work of securing supplies. "I understand now," he said as he tied down a container. "You didn't just build for normal conditions, you engineered for the worst case." "That's how humans survived long enough to reach space," Deho said, checking a rope knot. "We learned to respect nature's power and prepare for it." The wind grew stronger. Rain began to fall, first in large scattered drops, then in sheets. They finished their preparations and retreated into the shelter just as the storm truly hit. Thunder crashed across the sky so loud it felt like the air itself was splitting. Lightning flashed in brilliant bursts, turning the forest into a nightmare landscape of stark shadows and blinding light. The shelter groaned under the wind's force. The fabric roof rippled and snapped but held. Rain pounded on it like drummers gone mad. The forest around them roared with wind and falling branches. Through the walls they could see trees bending at impossible angles. Hana was terrified. She had never been so physically aware of a storm's power. Aboard the ship, storms were just sensor readings and minor turbulence. Behind habitat module walls they were background noise. But here, with only wood and fabric between them and nature's fury, the storm was real and present and overwhelming. Yuna was trembling, her telepathic senses probably overloaded by the chaos. Taman had wedged himself into a corner, all 6 limbs braced, ready to bolt if the structure failed. Even Hana's crystalline skin was flickering through panicked colors she couldn't control. But Deho sat calmly near the center of the shelter, and incredibly he was maintaining a small fire in a metal container. The smoke vented through a hole he had built into the roof design, and the flames provided light and a focal point. "Breathe," he said quietly. "The shelter will hold. I built it to handle this." "How can you be sure?" Hana asked, her voice tight with fear. "Because humans have been building shelters against storms for thousands of years. Because I learned from people who learned from people who learned from generations of experience. Because I tested every joint, checked every angle, and built with respect for what nature can do." A massive gust hit the shelter, and it shuddered. A branch crashed down somewhere nearby. The rain was so heavy it sounded like a waterfall had been redirected onto their roof. But the shelter held. Minutes passed. The storm raged, and slowly Hana began to realize that Deho was right. The shelter was holding. The fabric roof shed water without leaking. The wooden frame flexed with the wind but didn't break. The position between the large trees protected them from the worst gusts. The low profile meant the wind passed over rather than trying to lift them. It was working. This primitive human shelter was withstanding a storm that would challenge their advanced habitat modules. How? Taman asked, his voice full of wonder and confusion. The force calculations alone. It's not about resisting force, Deho explained. It's about redirecting it. A rigid structure fights the wind and can lose. A flexible structure moves with it and survives. That's the difference between engineering to dominate and engineering to cooperate. The storm continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 90 minutes. Gradually, the wind diminished. The rain lightened. The thunder moved away, rumbling in the distance. The forest began to breathe again instead of scream. When it was finally safe, they emerged from the shelter to survey the damage. Branches lay scattered everywhere. The stream had risen significantly but was already receding. Several smaller trees had fallen. The forest looked battered and bruised. But the camp stood. The shelter was intact. The fire pit had protected their fire. The suspended food containers swayed but held. The water channel was still functioning. Everything Deho had built had survived. In the distance, through the trees, they could see the landing clearing. 2 of the habitat modules had been torn from their anchoring points and tumbled across the ground. Their sides were dented, their sensor arrays damaged. The 3rd module remained upright but showed stress fractures in its walls. The primitive camp had outperformed the advanced technology. Taman stood staring at the damaged modules, then back at the intact camp, his limbs twitching as he tried to recalculate everything he thought he knew about engineering. Yuna was crying, but they were tears of relief and something else. Gratitude, maybe. Awe. Hana felt her crystalline skin displaying colors she had never seen before. Colors that might represent respect and humility and newfound understanding. Deho just smiled and started checking the camp for minor damage. Already thinking about small repairs. That's camping, he said. Building with wisdom, not just technology.